Captain Alan Carter stood quietly on the bridge of his ship, the Valiant Dawn, watching the stars move past them through the large windows at the front of the command center. He had been doing this job for more than 20 years now, and he thought he had seen everything the universe could show him. His ship was moving through empty space on what everyone thought would be just another normal survey mission to check out the Kepler system. Earth had sent them out here to see if there were any useful planets or resources worth claiming. Nothing special was supposed to happen today. Alan was a tall man with short gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too many long voyages. He kept his hands behind his back as he stood there, the way all good captains did when they wanted to look calm and in control. Lisa Morgan sat at her station handling navigation duties for the crew. She was younger than the captain, maybe 30 years old, with dark hair tied back in a tight bun. Her fingers moved quickly across the glowing screen in front of her, checking numbers and scanning for anything unusual in the space ahead of them. Suddenly her eyes went wide and she stopped moving. Something was wrong. She looked up at the captain with worry all over her face. She told him that she was picking up multiple ships ahead of their position. The computer could not identify what kind of ships they were. They were just sitting there at the edge of the Kepler system, not moving, just waiting. Lisa had never seen ships like these before in all her years of training. The shapes on her screen looked strange and unfamiliar. Alan felt his stomach tighten. Humanity had been traveling through space for 300 years now. In all that time, they had never found another species that could travel between the stars. Humans were alone in the universe, or so everyone believed. They had found planets with simple life, bacteria and plants and small animals, but never anything that could build ships or talk or think the way humans did. Now, on this ordinary day, everything was about to change forever. Alan took a deep breath and gave his orders in a steady voice that showed no fear. He told everyone to go to battle stations immediately. He wanted the shields raised and the weapons charged up and ready, but he made it very clear that nobody was to lock onto any targets yet. He did not want to start a war before they even knew who these strangers were. Lieutenant Jake Foster was the tactical officer, the man in charge of all the weapons and defensive systems on the ship. He was studying his displays with growing alarm, his face getting more tense with each passing second. He reported to the captain that he was counting 37 vessels out there in space. They were broadcasting signals on many different frequencies, like they were trying to talk to each other or maybe coordinate some kind of action. The ship that was closest to the Valiant Dawn was starting to power up its weapon systems. Jake could see the energy readings climbing on his screen. These people, whoever they were getting ready to fight. Nina Brooks was sitting at the communication station, wearing her headset and listening carefully to all the signals coming in from the unknown ships. She adjusted the settings on her equipment and then told the captain that they were receiving a transmission. It was audio only, no video. The strange thing was that their computer systems were somehow translating it automatically into English. Nina had no idea how that was possible. The technology to translate an unknown alien language instantly should not exist, but there it was, working perfectly, and she had a bad feeling about what the message was going to say. She asked the captain if he wanted to hear it, and Alan told her to put it through to the bridge speakers so everyone could hear. A harsh voice filled the bridge, speaking words that sounded angry and commanding. The voice told them that they had entered something called Dracon Imperium space without asking permission first. The voice ordered them to power down all their weapons immediately and prepare to be boarded by Imperium soldiers. If they resisted in any way, they would be destroyed right away without any further warnings. The voice also said that they must surrender their ship and all their technology to the Imperium. It was not a request. It was a demand. The tone made it sound like these Draken people were used to everyone doing exactly what they said without question. Alan looked around at his senior officers. The arrogance in that alien voice was impossible to miss. These Dracon people thought they owned this part of space and everyone in it. Alan opened a channel to respond. He identified himself clearly as Captain Alan Carter of the Human Defense Force vessel, Valiant Dawn. He explained calmly that humans had no territorial disputes with anyone. They were simply passing through this system on a peaceful survey mission. They meant no harm to anyone and they requested safe passage to continue their journey. His voice was polite but firm. He was not begging. He was stating facts. There was a long silence after Alan finished speaking. Then the harsh voice came back and now it sounded confused and irritated at the same time. The voice said the word human like it had never heard it before. It said there was no species with that name in any of the Imperium records. Then the voice said it did not matter what they were called. The Valiant Dawn had 10 seconds to comply with the orders or be destroyed. The countdown started immediately. 10, 9, 8. The voice was not joking around. Jake's console suddenly lit up with red warning lights everywhere. He reported urgently that the alien ships were locking their weapons onto the Valiant Dawn. The energy signatures he was reading were massive. These were not small guns. These were capital-class plasma batteries, the kind of weapons that could destroy a large ship with just a few hits. The aliens were not bluffing. They were really going to open fire. Alan's eyes narrowed as he made his decision. Humanity had spent 300 years preparing for this exact moment, even though everyone hoped it would never actually happen. Every human child learned in school about the lonely centuries, the long period when humanity pushed outward into space, expecting to find other intelligent life, but finding only empty planets and silence. During those centuries, humans had built their ships and weapons assuming that someday they might meet someone hostile. Today was that day. Alan gave his orders quickly and clearly. He told the helm officer to begin evasive pattern Delta. He told Jake to return fire but only target the enemy weapon systems. He wanted to show these Draken people that humans were not easy prey, but he did not want to kill anyone if he could avoid it. The Valiant Dawn moved with a grace and speed that clearly surprised the Imperium ships. They had probably expected a slow merchant vessel or maybe a clumsy exploration ship. Instead, they found a warship that could dance through space like a small fighter craft despite its size. The ship's railguns fired, sending tungsten projectiles flying through space at speeds close to the speed of light. The rounds hit the lead Drakon cruiser right where Jake had aimed them. The weapons array on the enemy ship disappeared in a bright flash of superheated metal and explosive decompression. The alien shields had not stopped the projectiles at all. The rounds had gone straight through like the shields were made of paper. Jake reported the results with grim satisfaction in his voice. Direct hit. The enemy shields could not stop human railgun rounds. The projectiles were moving too fast and hitting too hard. On the bridge of the Drakon flagship, Commander Vex was staring at his displays in complete disbelief. This unknown ship had just disabled one of his best cruisers with a single attack, using what appeared to be primitive kinetic weapons. That should not be possible. Imperium shields were specifically designed to deflect energy weapons. Kinetic threats were supposed to be stopped by point defense systems that shot down incoming projectiles. But these human projectiles were moving far too fast, much too fast for the defense systems to track and destroy them. Vex felt something he had not experienced in many years. Fear. Real fear. He ordered all his ships to concentrate their fire on the human vessel and destroy it immediately. His voice shook with rage and terror. The Drakon ships opened fire together, sending dozens of plasma bolts streaking through space toward the Valiant Dawn. The human ship's shields flared bright blue as the plasma hit them, but the shields held strong. Alan gripped his command chair as the ship shuddered from the impacts. Lisa called out that their shields were at 85% strength. The Drakon weapons were not designed to work against human shield frequencies. The Valiant Dawn was absorbing most of the damage without much trouble. The battle lasted exactly 17 minutes from start to finish. When it was over, 5 Drakon ships were crippled with their weapons destroyed. The rest of the enemy fleet had pulled back to a safe distance, clearly not wanting to continue the fight. The Valiant Dawn was still intact with shields at 40%. Alan stood up and straightened his uniform. He told Nina to open a communication channel to the Drakon flagship. When the channel was open, Alan spoke directly to Commander Vex. He said that humans had not wanted this fight, but they would not be bullied by anyone. Humanity wanted to establish peaceful relations with other species, but they would defend themselves when necessary. He suggested strongly that they should talk before more people died on both sides. The response came quickly, and all the arrogance was gone from Vex's voice now. He asked what humans were, his voice filled with. The Imperium Council chamber on the capital world of Draconis Prime was an ancient building that had stood in the same place for 12,000 years. Its tall walls were covered with the names of species that the Imperium had conquered and absorbed over the centuries. Each name was carved deep into the stone as a reminder of the Empire's power and reach. Today, those walls seemed to press down on everyone in the room, making the air feel heavy and hard to breathe. High Counselor Crate stood at the central speaking platform with his scaled hands shaking slightly as he prepared to address the emergency session that had been called. All around him, representatives from 73 different member species sat in their assigned seats looking shocked and worried. Nobody could quite believe what they were hearing. Crate began speaking in a formal tone that barely hid his own concern. He told the assembled council that 3 days ago, an Imperium patrol fleet had encountered an unknown vessel at the edge of Sector 7. The ship had identified itself as belonging to a species called humanity. This species was not in any of the Imperium databases. They had never paid tribute to the Empire. They had never asked permission to travel through Imperium space. They existed completely outside the knowledge and control of the government that had ruled this region of the galaxy for thousands of years. The implications were staggering. Counselor Mira stood up from her seat. She was a member of the Veloth species, and her body was made of a crystalline material that reflected the chamber lights in rainbow patterns. She spoke in a dismissive tone, saying that surely this was a minor concern. Every few centuries, the Imperium discovered a species that had not yet developed spaceflight technology. The standard procedure was simple. The Imperium would make contact, share some technology, and incorporate the new species into the Empire. Then everyone would move forward together. It had worked this way for thousands of years. Why should this time be any different? Crate's expression grew dark and serious. He said that was precisely the problem. These humans were not a primitive species waiting to be discovered and guided. They already had faster-than-light travel. They had weapons that could cut through Imperium shields as if those shields did not exist at all. Most concerning of all, they had defeated a fleet of 37 Imperial vessels using only a single ship. A single ship. Crate let those words hang in the air for a moment so everyone could fully understand what he was saying. The chamber immediately erupted into chaos. Voices rose in a dozen different languages, all expressing the same basic sentiment. Impossible. It could not be true. No single ship could defeat 37 Imperium warships. The tactical advantage alone made it mathematically impossible. But Crate was not known for exaggeration or panic. If he said it happened, then it happened. The representatives began shouting questions at him, demanding explanations, wanting to know how this could have occurred. Crate raised one hand and called for silence. The noise gradually died down until the chamber was quiet again. He said that he had requested Commander Vex to brief the council personally on what had happened. Vex was the military officer who had commanded the fleet during the encounter with the human ship. If anyone could explain what went wrong, it was him. A holographic projection suddenly appeared in the center of the chamber, showing the three-dimensional image of Commander Vex. He was standing at attention with his military uniform perfectly straight, but his eyes showed exhaustion and something that looked like trauma. Vex began his report by acknowledging that what he was about to say would sound completely insane. But he assured the council that every word was the absolute truth. The human vessel had moved through space with a precision and grace that he had never witnessed in his entire military career. Their weapons were kinetic projectiles, simple pieces of metal accelerated to speeds very close to the speed of light. These projectiles had penetrated Imperium shields without any resistance at all. Meanwhile, the Imperium plasma batteries, which had served the Empire well for thousands of years, had barely managed to scratch the human defensive screens. It was like fighting with one hand tied behind their backs while the enemy had every advantage. Counselor Drake leaned forward in his seat. He was a veteran military strategist with decades of experience in warfare and tactics. He asked if the human shields had somehow adapted to Imperium weapons during the battle. That was the only explanation that made sense to him. Vex shook his head and said no. The human shields operated on completely different principles from the beginning. The Imperium weapons specialist had analyzed all the sensor data after the battle. Their best theory was that the humans were using some form of gravitational manipulation. The energy from Imperium plasma bolts was literally being bent around the human ship by artificial gravity fields. The plasma never actually hit the hull at all. Mira asked about the speed of the human ship, and her voice no longer carried the confident, dismissive tone from earlier. Now she sounded worried. Vex pulled up tactical data on the holographic display. He explained that the human ship had demonstrated acceleration rates that were 30% higher than the fastest Imperium interceptors. Their maneuvering thrusters allowed them to change direction in ways that should have torn the ship apart from the internal forces. Yet somehow their hull had held together perfectly. The Imperium analysts estimated that human inertial dampening technology was decades ahead of anything the Empire possessed. Maybe even centuries ahead. The silence that followed was heavy and oppressive. Nobody wanted to say out loud what everyone was thinking. Finally, High Counselor Crate spoke, his voice sounding tired and old. He asked Commander Vex for his professional military opinion. If it came to open warfare between the Imperium and humanity, could the Empire win? It was the question everyone needed answered, but nobody wanted to ask. Vex hesitated before answering, and that hesitation told the Council everything they needed to know. A confident military commander would have answered immediately with assurances of victory. But Vex paused, choosing his words carefully. He said that if that single human ship represented their standard military capabilities, then no, the Imperium could not win, not with conventional tactics, not without accepting catastrophic losses that would cripple the Empire for generations. And they had absolutely no intelligence about the size of the human fleet or the extent of their territory. For all anyone knew, that one ship could be the weakest vessel in their entire navy. Counselor Drake stood up to his full impressive height. He said they must assume the humans have more ships. Many more ships. They must assume the humans have had enough time to build the infrastructure needed to support such advanced technology. Building one prototype ship was possible for even a small civilization. But building ships with that level of technology as standard equipment meant the humans had massive industrial capacity and resources. The real question, Drake continued, was how the humans had managed to develop all of this without anyone in the Imperium noticing. How did an entire spacefaring civilization grow to this level of capability while remaining completely invisible? Crate activated a large star chart that appeared on the wall behind him. A section of space that had previously been marked as unexplored territory now glowed bright red. He explained that this was where the encounter with the human ship had occurred. Beyond that point was a region that the Imperium had never bothered to survey properly. Long-range scans had shown it was rich in mineral resources and potentially useful planets, but the background radiation levels in that region had seemed high enough to make colonization difficult. The Imperium had assumed nothing of value existed there, and had focused expansion efforts in other directions. That assumption now appeared to be a terrible mistake. Mira whispered that they had assumed wrong. Her crystalline face reflected the red glow from the star chart, making her look like she was on fire. Crate nodded grimly and continued his explanation. Intelligence reports suggested that the region contained at least 40 habitable star systems. If humanity controlled even a fraction of that territory, they would rival the Imperium's own holdings. They could have a population in the billions or even trillions. They could have hundreds or thousands of worlds working together to build ships and weapons. Drake's tactical mind was already working through various scenarios and possibilities. He said the humans could have been watching the Imperium for years without anyone knowing. They could have been studying Imperium tactics, technology, and weaknesses while remaining hidden. They would know everything about the Empire while the Empire knew nothing about them. That kind of intelligence advantage was worth more than any number of ships or weapons. A prepared enemy was always more dangerous than a powerful one. Crate agreed with Drake's assessment. That was exactly why he had called this emergency session. The situation was unprecedented in the entire history of the Imperium. But there was more news to share. The human captain, Alan Carter, had agreed to attend a diplomatic meeting. He was willing to come here to Draconis Prime in person to discuss terms for peaceful coexistence between their species and the Empire. The question now facing the Council was whether to accept this offer. Drake muttered that the human captain probably just wanted to observe the Imperium Sea. Captain Alan Carter had seen many impressive sights during his 30 years of military service, traveling to distant worlds and witnessing the wonders of space exploration. But Draconis Prime took his breath away in a way nothing else ever had. The planet was absolutely beautiful, covered from one horizon to the other with massive cities that glowed with millions of lights. Orbital platforms circled the world like a jeweled crown floating in space. Ships of every possible design moved through carefully controlled traffic lanes in perfectly organized patterns. It was clear that this civilization had been building and growing for a very long time. Everything looked efficient and orderly and powerful. The Valiant Dawn began its descent through the atmosphere, moving slowly and carefully. 6 Imperium cruisers flew alongside as escorts, staying close on all sides. Alan knew this was not really an honor guard showing respect to a visiting dignitary. This was insurance. The Draken wanted to make absolutely sure that Alan went exactly where they wanted him to go and nowhere else. They were not taking any chances with the unpredictable humans. Lieutenant Jake Foster was watching his tactical displays with interest. He commented that the planet was impressive from a military standpoint. Population estimates put the world at 47 billion people living on the surface and in the orbital stations. The infrastructure alone represented centuries of constant development and construction. This was not some young colony world. This was the ancient heart of a vast empire. Alan told Jake to keep scanning everything they could see, but to keep all scans on passive mode only. He did not want to give the Draken any excuse to think the humans were actively spying on them. Jake replied with a slight grin that they were definitely spying on them. Alan confirmed with a small smile that yes, they absolutely were spying, but there was no reason to be obvious about it. Passive scans looked like normal navigation sensors. Active scans looked like weapons targeting systems. The difference mattered. The landing pad was enormous, easily large enough to hold vessels 10 times the size of the Valiant Dawn. Alan noted the defensive positions built into the surrounding structures. He saw scanner arrays pointing in every direction. He noticed the discrete weapons emplacements hidden in decorative architectural features. The Draken were taking absolutely no chances with security. They had built this landing facility to look welcoming, while actually being a death trap for any hostile ship that tried to cause trouble. Alan assembled his small away team in the airlock. Along with Jake, he had chosen Nina Brooks because of her excellent diplomatic skills and training. He also brought Dr. Helen Torres, who was the ship's chief science officer and the smartest person he knew. All three of them wore formal dress uniforms rather than combat armor. This was a calculated risk meant to project peaceful intentions. Wearing armor would suggest they expected violence. Wearing dress uniforms suggested they expected civilized conversation. Alan hoped he was making the right choice. Alan spoke quietly to his team before the airlock opened. He reminded them that they were not just representing their ship or even their navy. They were representing all of humanity in this first real diplomatic contact with another intelligent species. Every word they spoke and every gesture they made would be carefully analyzed. They needed to be respectful but also firm. They were here as equals, not as servants begging for mercy. The team nodded their understanding. They knew how important this moment was. The airlock opened to reveal a formal delegation of Dracon officials waiting for them. At the front of the group stood High Counselor Crate with his reptilian features showing no emotion at all. Behind him, Alan recognized Commander Vex from their earlier encounter in space. Vex looked uncomfortable, probably remembering how badly that first meeting had gone for his fleet. Crate spoke first, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through the ground. He welcomed Captain Carter to Draconus Prime, and offered the hospitality of the Imperium on behalf of all its member species. The words were polite and formal, exactly what diplomatic protocol required. Alan inclined his head respectfully and thanked the High Counselor for agreeing to this meeting. He expressed his hope that this would be the first step toward building mutual understanding between humans and the Draken people. Crate studied Alan for a long moment with eyes that revealed nothing of what he was thinking. Alan stood his ground and met that gaze without looking away or showing any fear. He kept his posture relaxed but confident. Finally, after what seemed like a very long time, Crate made a small gesture with one hand that might have indicated approval. He invited Alan and his team to follow him. The council was waiting to meet them. The walk through the Capitol building was clearly designed to intimidate visitors and remind them of the Imperium's power. Vast halls were lined with the banners of conquered worlds, each one representing a species that had been absorbed into the Empire. Display chambers were filled with artifacts taken from a dozen different civilizations, beautiful and terrible reminders of what happened to those who opposed Imperium expansion. Everywhere Alan looked, he saw the same unspoken message being repeated. The Imperium is ancient and powerful and supreme. Resistance is futile and submission is inevitable. Alan took it all in without making any comments. He let the Draken have their impressive display. It did not matter. Humanity had its own achievements to be proud of, and those achievements had been earned without conquering or enslaving anyone else. That made them even more valuable in Alan's opinion. The council chamber was everything Alan had expected and more. Representatives from 73 different species sat in assigned alcoves around the circular room. Each species looked completely different from the others. Some were obviously reptilian like the Dracon, others were insectoid or crystalline or even gaseous clouds contained in special suits. Alan could feel all their eyes focused on him, studying him, trying to figure out what kind of threat or opportunity humanity represented. The weight of their attention was almost physical. Crate took his position at the central speaking platform and formally presented Alan to the assembled council. He introduced Alan as Captain Alan Carter of the species known as humanity. Then he invited Alan to address the council directly. Alan stepped forward, making sure his voice was clear and strong so everyone could hear him. He thanked the council members for receiving him and his team. He said he had not come to make demands or issue threats. His purpose was simply to establish dialogue and communication. Humanity was new to this region of space, at least from the Imperium's perspective. Humans had spent the last 300 years developing their civilization in relative isolation. They honestly had not known the Imperium existed until just a few days ago. Counselor Mira spoke up with a question. She asked how humans could possess technology far more advanced than what such a young spacefaring species should have. Something did not make sense about the human story. Alan replied calmly that they could explain it through necessity. When humanity first reached for the stars, they found a universe that was harsh and unforgiving. They had no allies to help them, no trade partners to exchange knowledge with, no one to teach them how to survive in space. Everything humans had built, they had built themselves through hard work and innovation. Every technology and every scientific breakthrough had come from their own efforts without any outside assistance. Dr. Helen Torres stepped forward to elaborate on Alan's answer. She explained that human scientific development had followed a unique path, precisely because there was no outside influence. Human researchers were not constrained by established paradigms or traditional ways of thinking. They approached problems from completely fresh angles without any preconceptions about what should or should not be possible. What the Imperium saw as impossibly advanced technology, humans saw as the natural result of creative thinking and unfettered innovation. Counselor Drake stood up with an accusatory tone in his voice. He said humans could talk about innovation and peaceful science all they wanted, but the fact remained that they had destroyed 5 Imperium vessels with ease. That spoke of dedicated military development, not peaceful scientific research. Drake was clearly suspicious of human motives and intentions. Alan's expression became harder and his voice took on an edge. He said with all due respect that Imperium ships had fired first without any provocation. Humans had responded only in self-defense, as any species would. He also pointed out that human weapons had specifically targeted only the weapon systems on enemy ships. Humans could easily have destroyed those vessels completely, killing everyone on board, but they had chosen not to do that. The decision to show restraint should tell the Council something important about human intentions and values. Drake countered that it simply meant humans wanted the Imperium, ships left alive, to deliver a message of fear. Alan replied firmly that it meant humans valued life, even the lives of those who had attacked them without warning or justification. Yes, humanity was capable of defending itself effectively, but humans genuinely preferred peace whenever possible. That was exactly why Alan was standing here talking to the Council, instead of fighting another battle in space. High Counselor Crate held up one hand, calling for calm. He said they should be direct and honest, witty. While Captain Alan Carter was busy with diplomatic discussions on the surface of Draconis Prime, important events were unfolding back in human-controlled space that would change everything about the current situation. Commander Kate Sullivan stood in the large observation deck of the Earth Defense Command Station, watching through the transparent windows as a massive task force of 30 warships prepared for immediate departure. Each vessel in that fleet represented the absolute pinnacle of human engineering capability, built carefully over many decades in secret shipyards hidden throughout the Sol system and other human territories. Most people in the galaxy had no idea these ships even existed until right now. Admiral George Harris walked up behind Kate, his reflection clearly visible in the viewport beside hers. He asked if she was having second thoughts about the mission they were about to undertake. Kate shook her head firmly. She said she had no doubts about the mission itself, but she kept thinking about something Captain Carter had said before he left Earth for his diplomatic meeting. Humanity had lived in peaceful isolation for such a long time. Now they were about to announce their existence and capabilities to the entire galaxy in a very dramatic way. Everything was going to change after today. Harris replied that Carter's unexpected encounter with the Dracon Imperium had forced humanity's hand earlier than anyone had planned. Earth Command had always known this day would eventually come. It was simply arriving sooner than expected. Harris believed it was better to demonstrate strength right from the beginning, rather than appear weak and vulnerable later. First impressions mattered greatly in interstellar politics. If humanity seemed weak during initial contact, other species would treat them as subordinates forever. The task force began moving away from the station in a coordinated pattern that looked almost like a dance. Each ship followed its assigned position with perfect precision. Every crew member on every vessel had been training for exactly this moment for years. They were ready to demonstrate conclusively that humanity was not some minor species that could be pushed around or conquered easily. They were prepared to make a statement that would be heard across the entire region of space. Kate moved over to the main command console and asked for a status report on the fleet. Lieutenant Paul Grant checked all his displays carefully before responding. He reported that all vessels were showing ready status across the board. Quantum drives were operating at optimal capacity with no problems detected. They could reach Imperium space in approximately 3 days if they maintained maximum acceleration the entire way. Harris commented thoughtfully that 3 days seemed both very long and very short at the same time. 3 days to potentially start a war that could cost millions of lives. 3 days to potentially prevent that same war through a show of overwhelming force. Everything depended on how the Imperium reacted to the arrival of a human battle fleet. Harris expressed his hope that Captain Carter could keep the Dracon officials talking and negotiating until the reinforcements arrived to back up his position. Back on Draconis Prime, Alan was indeed still engaged in discussions with Imperium officials, but the conversations had taken a completely unexpected turn that nobody had anticipated. High Counselor Crate had personally arranged for the human delegation to receive a private tour of the capital's military history museum. This was clearly a transparent attempt to intimidate the humans through impressive displays of historical military might and past conquests. The Dracon wanted Alan to see exactly what happened to species that opposed the Imperium. What the humans found in that museum shocked them in ways the Dracon had never intended. Dr. Helen Torres was standing completely still in front of a particular display case, staring at the artifact inside with intense scientific fascination. Her training allowed her to keep her expression carefully neutral, even though her mind was racing with implications. She called quietly to Alan and told him he needed to see this immediately. The artifact in the case was obviously ancient, its surface covered with symbols and markings that time had nearly erased completely. But Helen's scientific training allowed her to recognize certain patterns. She could make out mathematical notation that was still barely visible. She could see engineering diagrams that had survived the centuries despite heavy decay, and she recognized the underlying principles being described. Alan asked quietly what exactly he was looking at, keeping his voice low because their Dracon guide was watching them carefully. Helen whispered back that this was a quantum drive schematic, but it was incredibly ancient, at least 10,000 years old and possibly much older. Most importantly, the design principles visible in the artifact were remarkably similar to human quantum drive technology, not exactly identical, but the underlying theory was definitely the same. Someone had figured out the same basic approach to faster-than-light travel that humans had discovered. Alan carefully read the information placard mounted beside the display case. It described the artifact as a relic from an ancient species called the Architects. According to Imperium historical records, this civilization had supposedly existed long before the Dracon Imperium was even founded. The Architects had been the dominant power in this entire region of space. Then they had vanished without leaving any clear explanation, disappearing so completely that only ruins and occasional artifacts remained as evidence they had ever existed at all. Their Dracon guide, a scholarly individual named Talon, noticed the humans' intense interest in the Architect display. He commented that it was indeed fascinating. The Architects had been the supreme species in this region over 12,000 years ago. They had built structures that were still standing today, thousands of years after their disappearance. They had created technologies that the Imperium was only just beginning to understand, even after millennia of study. And then, within the span of a single generation according to geological records, They had vanished completely from every world they had colonized. Nina Brooks asked the obvious question. What had happened to cause such a complete disappearance? Talon's expression became somber and thoughtful. He explained that nobody really knew for certain. The prevailing theory among Imperium scientists was that the architects had somehow transcended physical existence entirely, moving into some higher dimension or plane of reality. Other researchers believed the architects had destroyed themselves in a massive civil war that left no survivors. All anyone knew for certain was that they had left behind impressive ruins on hundreds of different worlds scattered across space. They had also left artifacts like this quantum drive schematic in various locations. Helen moved to examine another display case, her scientific curiosity completely overriding normal diplomatic protocol and caution. This case contained what appeared to be some kind of weapon. The design was elegant and beautiful, while simultaneously being clearly terrifying in its potential destructive capability. Helen asked carefully if the Imperium had ever attempted to replicate or reproduce any of the architect technologies they had discovered over the centuries. Talon made a gesture, with his hands that might have been the Dracon equivalent of a shrug. He said the Imperium had certainly attempted to replicate architect technology many times. They had succeeded occasionally with simpler devices. But most architect creations remained far beyond current Imperium capabilities to reproduce or even fully understand. The architect's grasp of physics and engineering had surpassed anything the modern species could achieve by a very considerable margin. It was humbling and frustrating in equal measure. Alan caught Helen's eye and communicated silently the way longtime colleagues could. The implications of what they were seeing were absolutely staggering. If human technology genuinely shared fundamental principles with architect technology, it suggested a connection that nobody had ever anticipated or even imagined possible. This discovery changed everything about humanity's position in galactic politics. That evening, back in the secured quarters that had been assigned to the human delegation, Alan gathered his small team to discuss what they had learned. Jake stated flatly that it was completely impossible. There was simply no way that ancient aliens could have influenced human technological development on Earth. Humans had possessed quantum drive theory for only about 200 years. The timeline did not make any sense at all. Helen suggested an alternative possibility. What if the architects had not vanished completely as everyone believed? What if some small group of them had survived their civilization's collapse? What if those survivors had somehow made it all the way to Earth in humanity's distant past? They could have left behind knowledge or technology, or at least inspiration that influenced human development over thousands of years. Nina looked extremely skeptical of this theory. She pointed out that would mean architects had been hiding among humans for thousands of years. Why would they do that? And why would they choose to reveal their advanced technology only now after staying hidden for so long? The whole idea seemed like wild speculation without any real evidence to support it. Alan spoke slowly as a new idea formed in his mind. Maybe the architects had not intentionally revealed anything at all. Maybe human scientists had stumbled onto architect knowledge completely by accident. Human. The council chamber was in complete chaos when Alan arrived with his team. Large holographic displays showed the approaching human fleet in perfect detail. 30 warships were arranged in a formation that was unmistakably military and aggressive looking. Council members were shouting over each other, demanding immediate action, calling for the Imperium Defense Fleet to be mobilized and deployed. Some were even calling for a preemptive strike against the human ships before they could get any closer to the capital world. The room felt like it was on the edge of panic. High Counselor Crate stood at the central speaking platform looking angry, but also showing something Alan had not seen in him before. There was respect mixed in with the anger, a grudging acknowledgement that humanity had just demonstrated serious military capability. Crate's voice cut through the noise like a blade. He addressed Alan directly and demanded an explanation. How could Alan come here speaking words about peace while human military forces were surrounding the Imperium capital world? It looked like preparation for invasion, or at minimum an attempt at intimidation through overwhelming force. Alan stood straight and made sure his voice carried clearly to every corner of the large chamber. He told Crate honestly that he had not been aware his government was planning to send military reinforcements to Draconis Prime. Earth Command had not informed him of their intentions before he left for this diplomatic mission, but he said he understood completely why they had made this decision. His superiors wanted to ensure that Alan could negotiate from a position of genuine strength rather than vulnerability. They wanted to make absolutely certain the Imperium took humanity seriously as a potential equal partner. Counselor Drake practically shouted his response. He asked if Alan seriously expected them to accept that 30 warships surrounding their homeworld was simply a negotiating position. It looked like an act of war. It looked like humans were preparing to attack if they did not get exactly what they wanted from these talks. Alan replied calmly that he would call it insurance rather than aggression. It was the same kind of insurance the Imperium had used when they surrounded the Valiant Dawn with 37 vessels during their first encounter. The only real difference was that humans had not opened fire on anyone. The fleet was simply holding position and waiting. If the Drakon wanted to see that as a threat, they were free to do so. But it could also be seen as a demonstration that humanity was serious about maintaining its independence. A junior officer rushed into the chamber carrying a data tablet, which he quickly handed to High Counselor Crate. Crate's expression changed dramatically as he read the information on the screen. When he looked up at Alan again, his voice was very quiet, which somehow made it sound even more ominous and threatening. He said that Imperium long-range scanners had completed their detailed analysis of the human fleet. Each of those 30 ships was significantly larger than the Valiant Dawn. Each one was more heavily armed with more powerful weapons. Each one had stronger shields and better defenses. Most importantly, according to Imperium analysts, each ship incorporated technology and design principles that resembled nothing so much as ancient architect engineering methods and theories. The entire chamber fell completely silent. Every eye turned toward Alan and his small team. The weight of their attention was almost crushing. This was the moment that would determine whether there would be peace or war. Alan acknowledged Crate's statement calmly. He said that humans had indeed noticed the similarity between their technology and architect technology. Dr. Helen Torres had discovered it while touring the military museum just a few hours ago. They were fully aware of what those similarities might imply about human origins or development. Crate descended from his elevated platform and approached Alan directly, moving to stand face to face with him. He asked the question that everyone in the room desperately wanted answered. Were humans actually the architects? Had that ancient species survived after all by hiding in some distant corner of space, building their strength in secret, while the rest of the galaxy believed them extinct? Was humanity simply the architects under a new name, returning now to reclaim their former dominance? Alan met Crate's intense gaze without flinching or looking away. He answered firmly that no, humans were not the architects. Humans were human. As far as anyone on Earth knew, they had always been human with no connection to any other species. But Alan acknowledged it was entirely possible, perhaps even probable, that the architects had made some kind of contact with Earth in humanity's distant past. Whether they had left behind actual knowledge, physical technology, or simply inspiration and ideas, nobody currently knew. What humans did know for certain was that they had developed their civilization independently over thousands of years. They had been completely unaware that they might be walking in the footsteps of a species that had come before them. Counselor Mira stood up, her crystalline body reflecting the chamber lights in shifting rainbow patterns. She suggested a theory that seemed to make sense of the available evidence. Ancient records indicated that the architects had supposedly seeded multiple worlds with their presence, perhaps attempting to create successor species or backup populations. What if humanity was one of those seed populations? What if humans were not just following in architect footsteps, but were actually their biological or cultural descendants, carrying forward their legacy whether they knew it or not? Dr. Helen Torres stepped forward to respond to Mira's theory. She acknowledged it was an interesting hypothesis that deserved serious scientific investigation, but regardless of where humanity came from or how they developed, the basic fact remained unchanged. Humanity existed right now as a living civilization. They were here in this region of space. They had advanced technology and the will to defend themselves. They were not going to disappear or surrender simply because their origins were mysterious or concerning to others. Commander Vex entered the chamber at that moment, his military bearing showing obvious tension in every movement. He reported to High Counselor Crate that the human fleet was maintaining its position at the edge of the Imperium defensive perimeter. They had made absolutely no aggressive moves toward any Imperium assets, but they had also made it crystal clear through their formations and readiness status that they would not be intimidated or pushed around. The Imperium fleet commanders were urgently requesting orders on how to proceed. Should they attack the human ships? Should they take defensive positions? Should they attempt to establish communication? Crate turned back to face Alan with an expression that mixed frustration, curiosity, and calculation. He asked directly what humans wanted from this situation. What did humanity want from the Imperium and from the wider galaxy? This was the critical moment when everything would be decided. Alan chose his words very carefully, knowing that galactic history might turn on this answer. He said that humans wanted exactly what any intelligent species wanted: the right to exist without fear, the right to grow and develop their civilization, the right to explore the universe freely without being conquered or subjugated by others. Humanity was genuinely willing to coexist peacefully with the Imperium. They would establish normal trade relations. They would share scientific knowledge on mutually beneficial terms. They would cooperate on matters of common interest. But humanity would absolutely not surrender its independence under any circumstances. That was the one thing that was completely non-negotiable. Drake asked the hard question that was on everyone's mind. What would happen if the Imperium refused those terms? What if they insisted that all species in this region of space must acknowledge Imperial authority, as they had always done? Would humans accept war as the alternative to submission? Alan replied quietly but with absolute conviction. If forced to choose between war and submission, humanity would choose war every single time. The Imperium might manage to defeat that fleet waiting outside. With enough resources and determination, they might even manage to push into human space and destroy some colonies. But they would never completely defeat humanity. Humans were too widely spread across too many systems. They were too resilient and adaptable. They were too determined to remain free. Any war between humans and the Imperium would be long and devastating. In the process of fighting, the Imperium would weaken itself dramatically, leaving the Empire vulnerable to other species who might see the conflict as an opportunity to challenge Imperium dominance or break away from Imperial control. The truth in Alan's words was obvious to everyone in the chamber. The Imperium had maintained its power for thousands of years through a careful balance. They used military might to enforce their will when necessary, but they also used diplomacy and the promise of mutual benefit to keep member species loyal and cooperative. A prolonged destructive war with an advanced opponent would completely upset that delicate balance. It could potentially destroy everything the Imperium had built over 12 millennia. High Counselor Crate returned to his position at the central platform. He announced that the council would need time to deliberate on everything they had learned. He asked Alan and his delegation to remain on Draconus Prime as official guests. Crate trusted that Alan would use his communication abilities to ensure the